Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be doing a video on the Evans Gambit. I'm probably going to be breaking this into four parts because it's actually kind of it's a big opening. Okay, and I'm going to be focusing on the lines that I view as being playable today. So I'm going to be focusing on the best lines that you can play in the Evans Gambit. I'll also try to give you a little bit of the history and why we play these lines today. So the Evans Gambit starts out after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5, and then the Evans Gambit begins with b4. Now, of course, right here, there's the decision point. Black can choose to accept the gambit, or black can choose to decline the gambit. Okay, so bishop b6 is, of course, the Evans Gambit declined. And actually, just recently, this has become one of the more modern attempts to try to equalize with the black pieces. So I will be focusing a little bit of energy on this line at some point, because this is one of, I think, really maybe the two or three replies that black has that right now kind of put a question to the Evans Gambit. So the other thing that black can do is black can, of course, accept the gambit, and then after c3, black has basically every retreat under the sun. Black can retreat his bishop to c5, black can retreat his bishop to a5, black can retreat his bishop to d6, and black can retreat his bishop to e7. These are all considered legitimate defenses. I think the only retreat that really hasn't been tried is bishop f8. That's pretty much the only one that people think is probably no good, just undeveloping the bishop back to its original square. But who knows? There's still time. So, but basically, I would say that the two most common moves, the one that you'll see the most, is bishop a5 and bishop c5. The more modern move, I think, would be the move bishop to e7. And I think the move that is not as common, but I actually see it quite a bit, is bishop d6. So I'm going to be focusing kind of each individual video on one of these retreats, okay? So this first video, I'm just going to try to give a history, and I'm going to try to show you a little bit of theory on bishop d6, and I'm going to give you a little bit of history of other moves and some history of like the move orders. So we'll start with this retreat because I don't think this retreat is actually very good, and this is my recommendation with bishop d6, is just play the immediate d4, and then what black usually does is black plays knight f6. Now, the reason black chooses to play this particular line is a lot of times in the Evans Gambit, as you'll see in the other lines, black has a problem getting his king out of the middle of the board. What black does here is he overprotects the e5 pawn, and what this does is this pretty much guarantees that his king will get out of the middle. My recommendation is to try to refute this pretty directly. I think you should just play knight g5 immediately, hitting f7, and this almost seems like a beginner's mistake, because we all know he's going to castle, and we know that the knight and the bishop aren't worth as much as the rook and the pawn. But this bishop and knight being lined up like this is kind of unfortunate, so what I recommend is just castling here, and then after the move h6, my actual recommendation is at this point to play knight takes f7. Now, there is actually another option as well. You could play the move f4, which is kind of a quirky kind of sacrifice. You can sacrifice this knight on g5, and you are threatening to take on e5. And then after you take, they actually have to give you this knight back, because if they try to keep it with a move like, say, knight takes e4, queen h5 is a completely winning attack. You're triple attacking f7, and if, for example, they defend it with a move like queen e7, you are simply going to follow up with the move g6. And then after knight f6, rook takes f6 is game over. We have queen to h7 coming with mate. Okay, so rewinding, this is kind of a quirky little trick. What I don't like about this is, just in case maybe they prepped this, although I've never really met anybody that prepped this, so this is a trick that'll probably win you some games. They can actually give the piece back, and it's not clear after, say, G captures f6, bishop captures f6, it's not clear how you exploit this open h file. I think this position is just kind of unclear. I don't think this is anything special for either side. And that's why I recommend a slightly different approach. I just recommend taking right away. And then after rook takes, bishop takes. Yeah, we did the rook for the 2 pieces, but after f4, they pretty much have to give you a piece because you're threatening to play f captures e5. So you didn't just trade 2 pieces for a rook and a pawn. You traded 2 pieces for a rook and a pawn, and then you're going to harvest a piece on the very next move with the move f4. They can't retreat anything because their king is lined up with your rook. So, for example, they would play something like this, and then all these exchanges would happen. You would get an extra piece out of this deal, and then you would grab this pawn. You would play bishop f4. And I think this position is going to be slight advantage white. White is up an exchange here, but black has a lot of pawns for it. At the same time, black is completely underdeveloped, and his king is going to be very loose. So I think this is just slight advantage white, plain and simple. And that's one of the main reasons I don't think bishop d6 is a very good line. I think you can just play knight g5, and I think that's just going to be advantage white all day long. So I don't think this is one of the serious attempts at trying to get an advantage or trying to equalize against the Evans Gambit as black. I think for those attempts, I think we're going to be having to look at really, I think it comes down to 2 moves. I think it comes down to bishop a5 or bishop e7. So coming back to the history of the opening, because in this video I'll try to cover a little bit on this move bishop c5. Back when this opening started, almost everybody would play bishop c5. And a lot of people would play kind of the mistake here. They would castle. And this, nowadays, we know this isn't very good because it lets black keep the position closed. And that's the one thing that you don't want to happen in an Evans Gambit. You don't want the position to remain closed. There was a defense that was developed about a century ago called the Lasker Defense. And it goes d4, d6, d4, and then bishop b6. And the point is that the position's going to remain closed, and white's main like attacking idea, like a move like queen b3, doesn't work because now knight a5 is on, where the bishop's going to defend the knight. The knight's not just hanging there. So this concept works really well. Of course, we have this check, but then we don't have a good place to actually put our queen, and we can't play the normal continuation, which would be something like queen a4 hitting this knight, so that when they take the bishop, we take the knight, because now, of course, this knight is defended. We're just down a piece here. So that's the problem with the Lasker defense. Here you would just be forced to develop a piece. The position would remain closed, and this allows black to consolidate his position and basically get an advantage because he has an extra pawn. The Lasker defense basically kills the Evans Gambit if you allow it. So modern day players always try to avoid the Lasker defense. Okay, they try to avoid the Lasker defense, and another one they try to avoid is they try to avoid certain versions of what they call the half-compromised defense. But these can be avoided, and the way that we avoid them is we avoid them by playing d4 first. So this is a really critical move order that I want to emphasize. You gotta play d4 first. Okay, the point is of course, now I'm hitting this bishop with tempo. That's another reason today bishop c5 isn't favored very much, because it reduces black's options. If you play bishop a5, there is no tempo loss there. You actually have time to still try to set up the Lasker defense with d6. With the bishop on c5, you don't have that option. This is why this move has fallen out of fashion. Now, if you retreat the bishop, you are sacrificing the pawn to d captures e5. Those positions are considered okay for white. And if you capture, another type of defense that white typically has to avoid is a type of defense we call the half-compromised defense. And we avoid all of this stuff by simply castling here. This is the move order that we play. We don't take right away. We want to kind of avoid this bishop b4 check. Okay, and the point here is black doesn't really have much of an option except to go back into what we call the normal position. Because if black continues with the full compromised defense, this position has been known for a very long time to actually be quite good for white. This is actually considered advantage white. One of the ideas is, like, let's say they try to exchange queens. We simply shuffle our queen over to a square like a3, where they can't capture a rook because of bishop b2, trapping the queen. So this is like an old trick. Okay, so basically black's king is going to be in the middle, and white has more than enough compensation for the material. Also, f8, I'd like to note, is a better retreat than e8. And this is something that not everybody touches on. But if king e8 and we go into this same variation, you actually run into more difficulties because the king is on the e-file. And white doesn't need to play a move like queen a3 here. Here with the king on e8, you can definitely play a move like e5. And this is actually probably major advantage white already, just after e5, because there really is there's not going to be much of a saving grace here with this king on e8. He's actually going to have to try to shuffle over at some point, and he just doesn't have the time. With the king in the middle in this firing range, this is just advantage white. So the compromised defense not being played, usually black will go into what we call the normal variation. And we'll end up here in the normal variation. Now here in the normal variation, there's basically 4 moves that get tried. And actually you can try any one of these moves. I think they're all acceptable. I think just about anything in the normal variation is going to lead to slight edge white. And it's just because white has this nice pawn center. And you've basically got more than enough compensation for the pawn at this point because you've got the nice pawn center, you've got the space, and the position is open. It's not a closed position like you would see in the Lasker defense. As long as you keep the position open and you keep your development, typically in the Evans Gambit you have compensation. You will have compensation for that pawn and you will have at least a slight edge because you have more space, you have a better pawn center, and you have more development. You just have to make sure that you don't let black consolidate his position because, of course, then black is up the pawn. So the best move, and the move that I think is still the most popular, is the move knight c3. Now, other tries are, of course, the moves h3, which is just to hold the center. It's just to prevent bishop g4, because one of the replies against knight c3 is bishop g4. The move bishop b2, very similar, just developing. And the move d5, which kind of has a bad reputation for no real good reason. A lot of positional people don't like it because they don't like the idea of blocking their light squared bishop. But from just a real chess perspective, you are gaining space, and there is really just nothing wrong with gaining space. I mean, it's a caveman way of playing chess to push your pawn from d4 to d5 and just gain space, but it does work. And actually, Paul Morphy was a big fan of the move d5, and in spite of it having a bad reputation, I haven't seen anything to suggest that this is anything less than slight edge white. I will make the argument that knight c3 is probably better, but d5 is by no means a bad move. You can get an advantage with any one of these 4 moves. So after knight to c3, the main line theory is bishop to g4, and they really need to do this. If they don't do this, they get in significant trouble. So if, for example, they play knight f6, what you should do is you should break in the middle immediately. And I'm just going to show you a Paul Morphy game real quick that ended very badly. It went d captures e5, bishop a3, cutting off the king. And this is really important. The king remains in the middle. And then bishop g4 now. And this was actually an interesting game. He actually was trying to defend by playing bishop h5. There was a previous game that went bishop d4, and that also ended pretty badly for black, but usually things do when the king is in the middle like this. So queen b3, hitting f7, bishop h5, and then Paul Morphy takes in the middle of the board. Rook d1 attacking the queen, e6, and then this is just a real typical example of how badly things can go. And actually black had to resign here. The threat of bishop takes c6, bc6, queen c6 is pretty much unstoppable, and there's actually, there's almost no good move here for black. Like, if, for example, we played a move like knight e5, takes, queen takes, this is game over. You know, queen d7 is mate. So that was a example of what happens if they just play knight f6. You just play e5, you break it open, you get a huge advantage with bishop a3, and you've got a big winning advantage there. So bishop g4 is the main line in the normal variation, and then you have to kind of return the favor. That's the only way that you can keep your pawn center together. They're going to take on f3, and then unfortunately you're going to have to double your pawns with g captures f3. But again, this pawn center should yield you something. So after they break the pin with king f8, and I know this looks crazy, but king f8 is objectively the best move. You were threatening d5, which would have won a piece. So bishop e3. And this is another reason why white has something here, is he kept this king in the middle of the board. If you keep the king in the middle of the board and you keep your center, usually you have compensation. So I'll just give a few more moves here. Knight on g to e7, you get your king off the g-file, you get your rook on the g-file. Black tries to open up his h6 and g5 so he has a place to hide his king. But in the end, we're going to end up with an unsafe position for black's king. And white is going to have more than enough compensation for whatever little bit of material he's down at this point. He's got a wide open king, he's got nowhere to hide, and we've got all of our pieces ready to come in for this attack. This is definitely slight edge to major advantage white. I think white's doing very, very good here. Okay, so that is the main line, and that is basically your treatise on the normal variation. Basically, I'm recommending you play knight c3, and then after knight of6, you play e5. So that's pretty much going to conclude this video. Okay, in the other in the next 3 videos, I'm going to be covering the declined, which I think is a serious attempt at getting equality. I'm going to be covering the move bishop a5, and I'm going to be covering the move bishop e7, each in their own video. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and I hope you learned something new about chess.